Hello. Hi. There's sound playing, so just listen carefully. Hi, my name's Tash Nikol, and I'd like to take you on a quest through my journey in the Decrypt program class of 2026. What started as a curiosity about symbols I was seeing in the iron gates around me in Brooklyn, forms I had also recognized within my herbalism and organizing communities, sent me on a journey 1,300 miles south into an inquiry rooted near my paternal lineage in Louisiana. After moving through a few different thesis directions and my ongoing issues with commitment, damn. It's too many friends in the audience. I kept being nudged back to iron. The material was pulling me. What unfolded was a living lineage of Black craftsmanship shaped through memory, spirituality, labor, community. My research journey began on my fire escape, recognizing a design form I had seen in many cities throughout the South. The Sankofa is one variation of a form within the Adinkra visual language created by the Akan people of Ghana and parts of Cote d'Ivoire. Many of the decorative iron fixtures around brownstones here in New York carry Sankofa and other Adinkra symbols embedded within their design. These motifs, woven into gates, balconies, and architectural ironwork, translate philosophies and proverbs of the Akan, particularly the Ashanti people, into the environment. Sankofa carries the message, go back and get it. It asks us to understand that the past illuminates the present. It is something we return to, something we retrieve. This symbol often is associated with the proverb that translates to, it's not too taboo to go back for what you have forgotten or what was left behind. That message is especially urgent in the context of our current world. And seeing the Sankofa embedded in so much ironwork, I began to understand its sense and to sense it as something deeply intentional, a quiet but persistent reminder woven into our built environment, letting us know that the future depends on what we choose to carry forward. That realization led me to think more closely about where these symbols are most predominant and how they exist in public spaces. New Orleans is a city known for its decorative ironwork. It makes up much of the image and visual language of the city. You can see it lining balconies in the French Quarter, woven through cemeteries and stairwells, and across homes. In New Orleans, visual forms like the Sankofa and other Adinkra forms appear in much of the city's architectural decor. And understanding the relevance of these symbols within West African spiritual tradition and philosophies is what pushed me to uncover the stories behind who designed them into the landscape in the United States. It was important for me to get familiar with the stories of the craftspeople behind this architectural aesthetic. My research inquiries eventually put me in connection with Karina Roca, a blacksmith, preservation scholar, and educator who moved to New Orleans from New York, Crown Heights specifically, in 2019 to study under a third-generation master blacksmith, who I'll return to later in our journey together. Karina helped shift the scale of my inquiry. Through our conversation, I began to see how deeply these symbols were woven into the religious landscape of New Orleans, especially within Catholic spaces. One place we kept returning to in our talk was the St. Louis Cathedral, one of the city's most recognizable architectural landmarks, a major tourist destination, and the oldest continuously operating Roman Catholic church in the United States. What struck me about this realization was that West African coded language had made its way onto the roof of the cathedral in the 19th century. Visible in plain sight, not placed there in secret. At the top of the most powerful religious structure in New Orleans, at a time when the labor of the cathedral was majority free and enslaved Afro-Louisianans. The cathedral, which sits at the head of Jackson Square, also known as the site of the Louisiana Purchase. For me, that changed everything. So when I arrived to New Orleans, I traveled straight to Jackson Square to see the cathedral myself. And a short walk from the cathedral was the Mississippi River. I decided to walk there to see if I could get to the shoreline, where I made an offering to the river and my ancestors, asking them to open up a path towards deeper knowledge and understanding for me. Standing there, I felt the weight of the river's history. Now carrying steamboats and tourists, this place had once been a port where enslaved ancestors arrived in bondage. Yet as I turned to look back towards the St. Louis Cathedral, I could only imagine what it might have felt like for my ancestors to arrive here and to see Sankofa symbols rising over the rooftop of the grand Spanish Baroque church, a sign from home piercing through the sky in an unfamiliar world. After visiting the cathedral and Jackson Square, I went to the old Ursuline convent to meet with Chris Wiseman, the executive director of the St. Louis Cathedral. There I also encountered what is claimed to be the oldest iron spiral staircase in the United States, built off the backs of Black metalworkers and artisans. So the story of New Orleans is distinct for its layered history of religious and colonial control. Louisiana was first governed by the French and then secretly ceded by King Louis XV to his Spanish cousin before being returned to France under Napoleon and finally sold to the United States through the Louisiana Purchase, helping to secure control of the Mississippi River. A common thread that emerged in both my conversations with Karina and Chris Wiseman was Catholicism and its use as a system of civic control within the city. A system also physically embedded into the design of the city itself, with the St. Louis Cathedral being positioned at the center of the Cartesian grid of New Orleans, looming over Jackson Square, a site where military parades and capital punishment once took place. The cathedral is an architectural symbol of authority. The story of the Adikra symbol in New Orleans is a story of Black ingenuity and spiritual adaptation. Missing from this story is, of course, any names of Black craftspeople, the structures that outlived them, along with the knowledge systems they carried and intentions embedded within the design work. Some of that history remains scattered across archives, detached from people who deserve to inherit it. The story of Black craft workers in New Orleans can be traced to the immense knowledge carried across the Atlantic from the Senegambian region and the Gold Coast regions of West Africa, cultures deeply rooted in ironwork, metalwork, farming, and trade. They also carried spiritual philosophies, including the Akan Adikra traditions and Yoruba beliefs, honoring Ogun, the deity associated with creation, innovation, war, and agriculture. Although many were forced into Catholicism under French and Spanish rule, enslaved artisans preserved memory through craft across the Atlantic and Caribbean. African spiritual forms and deities were often concealed behind the imagery of Catholic saints, allowing these traditions to survive within the material culture of the city. An example of this can be seen in Santeria and Lukima traditions, where Ogun became associated with the Archangel Michael, or where the Sacred Heart of Jesus may have become entangled with the visual form of the Adikra. Thank you, Alex Deleuze. This thread led me on a cemetery walk with Heather Veneziano, a Tulane preservationist who guided me through St. Louis Cathedral Cemetery 1 through 3, including sections 2 and 3, which are closed to the public. There, I noticed connective threads, names barely visible from deterioration, etched into the corners of tombs. Figures like Paul Hippolyte Monceau, who was a stonecutter who often worked with J.M.B. Dupuy, who was the architect of the St. Louis Cathedral. Fragments like these, company names, stone markings, are some of the only remaining traces pointing towards the Black metalworkers and craftspeople who likely labored under them, histories that may still survive within Catholic notarial records. During our walk, Heather brought me to the tomb of the Society of Arts and Crafts, where many Black craftspeople laid to rest. These societies, guilds, and community networks connected to these spaces became another important thread in my research. Systems through which blacksmiths and artisans supported one another financially, organized collectively, secured burial funds and life insurance, and passed knowledge across generations. When I finally made it to Andrew's Welding and Blacksmith Shop in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, the research stopped feeling nostalgic and came alive. I found myself inside a living line where knowledge is still carried through repetition and passing the hammer from one generation to the next. Through Karina, I met Daryl Reeves, a 3rd-generation master blacksmith, whose shop became another space for understanding this lineage. Inside the shop, the transmission of knowledge felt deeply communal. Techniques were passed down by hand, stories exchanged over work and friendship, family, mentorship, and gathering. There, Black craft lived on in the act of making together, and through their work restoring 18th century ironwork restoring 18th century ironwork across present-day New Orleans. What I learned from Daryl embodied the spirit of Sankofa. Returning to retrieve what has been forgotten in order to move forward. Through restoration, he retraces the work of 18th century blacksmiths brought from West Africa to New Orleans under enslavement, craftsmen who forged the city's ironwork by hand on marshland long before power tools or modern machinery existed. As Karina told me, the majority of the restoration work we do is restoring the ingenious work of people we'll never know the names of. That's the power and that's the mystery. It's something that I sit with often, and it's what connects Daryl, Karina, and the powerful lineage of Black ironworkers and craftspeople from the diaspora. It's also what I stepped into after uncovering a visual language that has always been here, waiting to be organized, remembered, and seen. Thank you.